Good morning, I'm Robert Tan from Markets to Policy, from Manila to the world. We cut through the noise so you can navigate, adapt, and lead. This is Business 360. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas hikes rates to 4.5% as it expects inflation to exceed targets through next year. The Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry weighs in on the rate hike and other issues impacting businesses. The government's budget deficit widens in March with the energy emergency adding to public spending. And Vice President Sara Duterte denies hidden wealth allegations as lawmakers scrutinize 6.77 billion pesos in reported bank transactions. For the first time in more than 2 years, the Bangko Sentral delivered a rate hike, a clear signal that inflation risks are becoming more immediate. Aya Apolentissima has our top story on Business 360.
The easing cycle is over. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas raised its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points to 4.5% in its second scheduled Monetary Board meeting of the year. This is the BSP's first tightening move in more than 2 years after a long easing cycle meant to support growth. BSP said they delivered the rate hike because of a deteriorating inflation outlook driven by tensions in the Middle East.
Higher oil and fertilizer prices are expected to spill over to food prices and services. Core inflation is rising, highlighting the risk of demand-driven inflation.
The BSP now projects average inflation to hit 6.3% this year and 4.3% in the next, above the tolerance band. This signals that price pressures might no longer be a temporary spike. As for the coming months, BSP says inflation may settle around 5%, up from 4.1% recorded in March. Remolona says the rate hike is preemptive move to anchor expectations and prevent second-round effects while still supporting economic recovery. He adds a larger 50 basis point hike was considered but would only happen if the Middle East conflict drags on and prices continue to surge. For now, the BSP will remain data-dependent, prepared to adjust policy as needed. Aya Apolentissima, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
The Philippines will keep aiming for an A credit rating even after Fitch Ratings lowered its outlook for the country from stable to negative. BSP Governor Eli Remolona notes the outlook was driven by external factors, and if they ease, then the country could get an upgrade. From its present BBB rating, Remolona says the country has effective fiscal and monetary policies. He also pointed to the country's first ever inclusion in the JP Morgan Bond Index, a breakthrough that is expected to trigger billions of dollars in foreign inflows.
By the way, a good sign of that is JP Morgan has decided to include our peso government bonds in their emerging markets bond index. That may be worth $5-6 billion US dollars in terms of additional inflows into our peso bond market.
The Department of Finance also welcomed the inclusion, saying it's a strong vote of confidence in the country's solid fundamentals and fiscal discipline. Meanwhile, businesses are facing a tougher operating environment with higher rates and fuel prices still vulnerable to tensions in the Middle East. And to find out how companies are coping and what support they need, we bring in Perry Ferrer, the president of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or PCCI. Good morning, Perry. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
And thank you, Robert. Good morning, and thank you for having the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry on your show.
Now, sir, let's start with this. The BSP has raised yesterday the policy rate to 4.5%. Now, what is the sentiment of the business community, and how will it impact businesses moving forward?
You know, currently, amongst the members of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, the majority of our members are MSMEs. Increasing the interest rates is not within our thinking range right now. What they're thinking, the businesses are thinking, how can we survive this crisis? But on the upper spectrum, on the large companies, it's going to be difficult with increasing interest rates, the cost of borrowing money, and currently with all the supply chain issues, it's going to be difficult, how to replenish inventory. It's going to cost more to operate. It just added to the operating costs of the companies.
So do you think, was it the right thing to do? There are two schools of thought here. Talking to economists and analysts, some would say increasing, it should be the right time, but some would say it should still keep on a pause and wait and see.
Yes, Robert, when 35% or 40% of the business sector, which is the MSME, MSME contributes 35 to 40% of the GDP. That sector is struggling. The economy will have challenges. And when you add cost to their business operation, it's not going to be good. So we were hoping that, if we assist and help this 1.2 million MSMEs, we believe the economy will generate activity, trade will continue. So at PCCI, we're more concerned on the well-being and the survivability of this 1.2 million MSMEs.
Now, sir, we've seen the decrease of oil prices in the past 2 weeks. Is this a good sign? How are we seeing the business operate right now while they're tightening their belts?
Robert, in the past couple of days, we've seen prices go down, and thank you. It's a big welcome to the businesses, but we're still cautious. When we listen to the news, when we listen to what's happening in the Middle East and the pronouncement of the United States, we don't think it's gonna keep on going down. It might stabilize at that price, but the businesses are still very cautious. We haven't untightened the belts. We keep on tightening. And because the easing of these fuel prices, which we welcome, the trickle-down effect will be, a few weeks. So we're looking at the sustainability. Yes, so it takes time. We're working with the logistics companies now with the fuel prices down, because the fuel is 40% to 50% of the cost of the logistics company, and hopefully they can translate that to lower transportation charges to the businesses.
Now, as we are seeing the easing of the fuel prices, like we mentioned the past 2 weeks, and just this Tuesday, there was another rollback. Is PCCI still pushing to either suspend or lower the excise taxes on the fuel? We've seen it on kerosene and LPG, but diesel and gasoline, it's still up for discussion. What are your thoughts on that?
From the private sector, not just the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, when you look at the root cause of all this, increase in prices, increase in operating costs, it boils down to the fuel. Whatever measures, wherever we can get funds, whether it's VAT or other types of taxes, if we can lower it down back or close to the pre-crisis prices, it will effectively help all the MSMEs, the large businesses, the middle class, the lower income people. So lowering the fuel prices will help, not only here in the urban areas, all over the Philippines.
Why do you think it's still not on the table right now for discussion moving forward?
I believe it is.
Robert,
but I believe government officials are discussing, where can we get funds, where can we get, what can we reallocate in the budget that can help lower the fuel prices. We're just hopeful that the actions could be quicker
Yes.
because the MSMEs, that's where we're focused. The MSMEs.
Yes. How long can they wait? You've mentioned they're really doubling down and tightening their belts. We've seen, especially those MSMEs who require imports on local raw materials, which are higher, and they have smaller margins.
Yes.
They really can't take that hit much longer.
Exactly. We're talking here probably 2, 3, 4 months. So, we worked about a month ago. We met with DTI Secretary Roque,
Yes.
Christina Roque, and we were discussing how we can help the MSMEs.
Yes.
And the DTI has the program, and we thank DTI Secretary Roque. DTI has this 7 billion
Yes.
loan program.
This is from SB Corp, right?
Through SB Corp.
SB Corp,
Through
yes.
SB Corp. So DTI has the 7 billion with 3 different sectors. The first sector is 2 billion for women-led enterprises. Another 3 billion for export development, companies that are part of the supply chain and also for direct export. And the other 2 billion are for returning OFWs who want to start the business. So the Philippine Chamber, working with SB Corp, we did sign an MOU last Thursday, April 16, on implementing this, not to just PCCI members, but through the private
Yes.
sector. So this 7 billion fund will help in moving inventory or keeping these businesses running.
Yes, actually, DTI Secretary Roque mentioned that yesterday. We had her on our
Yes.
show on Business Brief in the afternoon yesterday, and it's really good to see that an agency very proactive in helping the MSMEs. But now going through those loans, I'm just curious, when these small companies get those loans, where do they get help in terms of guidance? So that they use the money properly, where should it go, what kind of mentorship? Is that where PCCI plays their part?
Yes, yes, Robert. So what PCCI's role is, on the front end, PCCI does, through our local chambers, that's the screening. We want to ensure, because 7 billion, we hope can go far, but
Yes.
with the number of MSMEs,
Yes, it's a lot.
it is a lot.
How do
So
you choose?
We want to make sure that the 7 billion, 2 plus 3 plus 2, goes to the proper, registered, credible businesses. So that's where PCCI, our local chambers, come into the picture. They would look and screen and advise prior to the application. So once it's applied, they go apply right to SB Corp. So when they get the loan, this is where our local chamber and local chamber members help mentor.
Yes.
Now that you have the money, use it for
Wisely,
where
yes.
it was loaned for. Business sustainability or for inventory replacement. We want to ensure that that's where it's going to be used. Now, one of the loan mechanics, which is the beauty of the DTI SB Corp program, is there is a potential of up to 12 months of grace period.
Yes.
So on the principal and the interest, depending on the type of business and the loan, grace period could be 3, 6, 9, 12 months.
And that's a lot of help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And we hope by 6 months or 9 or 12 months that we see real stabilization in the market and also in the fuel prices. Coupled with that grace period, there is a potential of no collateral.
Yeah.
So as you know, a lot of the micro businesses will be challenged if we ask for collateral.
They don't really have much of assets, especially now they're feeling the pinch.
Absolutely. So the program is good. On another note, so we have the DTI SB Corp. We spoke to Land Bank. So Land Bank has a similar program. So we're working with Land Bank on how to secure loans for MSMEs. And Land Bank, I believe Land Bank has 600 branches throughout the Philippines. and around 60 lending institutions or branches. So land
It
bank
could be better access, especially a lot of the MSMEs, not just here in Metro Manila, but in other regions.
Correct. So
Could
Land
that
Bank
help?
has that reach. So we're working with Land Bank and we're going through the details with Land Bank. So the chamber and a lot of the private sector associations, we're really looking for ways, how can we keep this 1.1 million or the 40%
Afloat, yes.
yeah, for the 40% contributor to the GDP moving
Yes.
and sustainable and not shut down. So once we stabilize or at least give them breathing room for the
Yes.
next 3 to 6 months, I think the economy, and that's where we want to see movement in trade
Yes.
and goods and services.
Besides the loan programs that are being provided for the MSMEs, when you talk to the MSMEs on the ground, what else are they looking for in terms of support from the government? Is the support fast enough, or do we still need more?
You know, when you are at that structure, or in that, if you are in the micro and the small range, they needed support weeks ago.
Yeah.
So because they're the first hit to feel the logistics cost increase, the import fees,
Yes.
and the cost to import goods immediately increase. So they're the first battlefield casualty. So they needed that. But now we're also looking at non-fuel related ways to reduce the cost, operating costs. So there is the trade facilitation. So hopefully the charges in the ports and the airports, the efficiency in getting imported
Yes.
items, because we're an import nation. So we're looking at lessening the cost in trade facilitation.
Does the 1 peso Roro for agricultural products help a lot?
Yes. Every peso, every centavo, where
Helps.
we can save.
Yes.
And if you add it all up,
Yes. If you
we
combine
help,
that, yes.
we help the businesses. And the businesses now, you know, they are in a pickle. My operating cost is
high.
increasing.
Should they increase their prices? It's
Yes.
hard. because-
It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's challenging for them. And do we replenish our inventory? So that's where we guide and mentor members. They do ask questions. Should we buy? So we're advising, instead of delivering every day to their customers, maybe you should scale it down to twice a week with larger. And then should we replenish volume? So we're trying to consolidate a lot of procurement and guide them to where they can get their biggest bang for their buck.
This way we see a lot of creativity coming out during a crisis.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where the private sector, we see the private sector working closer with the government,
Yeah.
because it's the whole Philippines that we want to make sure that after all this crisis, the Philippines is still up and ready.
Yeah, because it's best to work hand in hand, better communication with the private sector and the government, because it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the private sector we are the feet on the ground, and we
Yeah.
can tell real time
These are the
what
sentiments,
is
yes.
happening, and this is where support is needed. You know, a lot of the multinationals are comparing what is the Philippines doing, or how's the Philippine government reacting to this crisis, and comparing it to our neighbors.
Yeah. And when we compare, what are the things can we learn from what our ASEAN neighbors are doing? What are they doing right? What can we do in terms of looking at best practices that we can do here and execute here?
You know, Robert, this crisis will not be the last. We hope that it's not going to be a fuel crisis, but there will be one, hopefully, decades from now.
Yeah.
But this is where we need professionals really helping the country. What will we do? Where should we pour in resources? Should it be energy, sustainability, food, we need professionals to really look.
But we've
And
been
to
through crises before. What are the lessons learned before, and how is it different now? What kind of how has strategy changed when this crisis just appeared out of nowhere?
We didn't see any changes.
No changes.
No, we didn't see any effective changes from the business sector, from the private sector. You know, we were comparing it to Japan during the last energy crisis. You know, where they were similar situation to us, very little storage. Now they have over 230 days of fuel storage. They learned.
We have much less than that.
Significant. We have 30, 35 days.
The reason I asked that, Perry, because if you've seen the Fitch ratings, they have lowered the outlook from stable to negative. It's still not a downgrading. We're still at triple B status. But what does that mean? What does that signal to the business community on how should we move forward so that we don't get downgraded in the next 12 months, 18 months while they're assessing the situation here in the country?
We should keep the businesses moving. Currently, even the OFW remittances, which helps a lot, is now tightening. You know, just because the OFWs are also feeling the pinch. So we should look at how to get economy, goods, and services moving, helping. Now, going back to the MSMEs, they don't even know about what is this Fitch rating and all that. They're more concerned about how can I survive in the next
day-to-day operations. Yes.
With all these ratings, downgrading or just below, for us, for the Philippines, it's just costing us more in interest rates. That's all it is. But for the businesses, we're looking at how can we improve our supply chain, how can we improve the logistics, how can we have more trade facility efficiency.
Yes.
And I believe this is the time, Robert, that we really look and sit down, both private sector and the government and experts.
Yes.
Plan. And this is not 2 years. Let's plan the next 5 years. How are we going to handle food security? How are we going to handle energy security? Should we have 40% of our energy local? Should we again explore whether it's gas or oil? Should we have another refinery?
Yeah.
Should we increase our storage from 35 days to 60? And who's going to pay for that?
Yes.
You know, the Japan model, that 230 or 220 days of supply, I believe the government owns 60% of that, or 65. And the private sector also owns the other. So it's always a private sector, government at stake, working together for the country, basically.
Now, having said that, the PCCI has supported the revisiting the coal moratorium as a temporary bridge while renewable capacity is expanded. Now, why does the business community see this as necessary?
Coal is 60 to 65% of our baseload electricity, our corriente. So if we stabilize our baseload and even increase its capacity temporarily, now, I believe we can have stabilization in electricity prices. While we heard Secretary Garin on the Department of Energy accelerating a lot of these renewables, onboarding a lot of these solar farms, which is good. So the mix now, you have the solar and hopefully between 22% increases to 30%. Then we have our gas and geothermal. So if we increase that in the next, by 2030, it becomes 60% instead of the 40%, then I believe there will be security, energy security. But before that happens, let's secure our power supply, our electricity supply, which runs the factories
In
and the
business
businesses.
language, would you see that as hedging temporarily so that our allocations are hedged here, so that if let's say another crisis happens, we have some more to
Yes.
adapt better in the future.
Yes, that's the right word. We're hedging.
Now, in your view, sir, what are other countries, again, doing right that we could use and we could learn from today? Before the show, you mentioned you've been to Vietnam. You went to Vietnam. You've seen
Yes.
what's happening there. You've been to other countries. What do you see? So that and what do you see here that we're not doing that we can do? And what are we doing right? Ano pa yung kulang?
You know, I was in Vietnam 3 weeks ago. You wouldn't know there was a crisis. You know, when I converted their fuel, it's 3 weeks ago. They were at 56 or 58, and we were already at 140. Then a week after that, I went to Bangkok. They were a little bit more, in the 60 range, but their business was moving. I spoke to the business people. They were moving. They feel the increase, but not enough to worry. For 2026, we're talking. Are you worried in 2026? No. The government for decades has intervened on fuel, on food, so which they have an abundance of. Fuel, energy, and food, government stepped in and ensured the country. So now they're moving. I believe for the Philippines, we hope, we should look at long-term, not just one administration, then one administration.
Look long-term.
We should really look long-term and put laws in place that one administration does something good for whether it's energy, food, or other means. It shouldn't be touched for the next administration or 2 or 3 administrations down. And I believe
build
that's
a
what
strong enough foundation that it can surpass other administrations. But finally, Perry, I know you have to go somewhere. But quick advice to the government, to our MSMEs. What can the government do right now on maybe short term to help our MSMEs? And for the MSMEs, what should they look for? What should they do to at least while waiting for everything to ease?
To the MSMEs, let's continue to tighten our belts. Let's continue to look at, if there are expenses or investments that you don't need to do now, that it can wait. Be cautious. Cash is king nowadays. So let's preserve your cash, preserve your business. We in the private sector, different associations are looking for ways to help. And one is the loans and lowering the cost of operating business. We are here and we're looking at different ways, not just lowering fuel. And to the government, let's act faster. Let's look at the businesses. Let's look at the Filipinos on paano natin sila matutulungan. Ayuda is very difficult because ayuda doesn't go. It goes to just very selected people. So let's look for ways that
Helps everybody.
That helps most, if not all Filipinos. And let's start planning with the private sector and with some experts on the long-term solution, because the next crisis, hopefully in 10 years, but it will happen.
So we learn our lessons, hopefully.
Yes.
On that note, now, Perry, thank you very much for joining us this morning and sharing your insights. And it's good to hear that our MSMEs have a base support through PCCI. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for having the Chamber on your show.
Okay, more stories when we return. Business 360. We'll be right back. The government's budget deficit slightly widened in March by nearly 2%. The Bureau of the Treasury says the gap increased to 349.7 billion pesos as government expenditures outpaced revenues. The wider deficit came as public spending grew faster, including funds released for the energy emergency. But for the first quarter, the Treasury says the cumulative budget deficit narrowed by more than 20% from a year ago. Vice President Sara Duterte pushes back against allegations of billions in suspicious bank transactions, insisting her record is clean. Her defense team is challenging the figures and evidence, setting the stage for a high-stakes showdown in the impeachment process. Chad Gatchalian reports.
Vice President Sara Duterte asserts that she declared all her assets and transactions in her annual statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth, or SAL-NET. Duterte says she has a clean record and that she was never involved in any corruption scheme. This comes after the Anti-Money Laundering Council presented the report showing over 600 transactions from a set of bank accounts that were traced both to Duterte and her husband, lawyer Manasseh Scarpio. A total of 6.77 billion pesos in large and suspicious transactions were allegedly flowing through the said bank accounts, which supposedly did not match the network she had been declaring. But VP Sara remains unfazed. She hit the AMLAC, the Commission on Audit, the House of Representatives, and even President Bongbong Marcos. She says Marcos supports former Senator Antonio Trillanes on his narratives about alleged billions in bank accounts. VP Sara's legal team said the numbers that AMLAC presented were bloated and that the suspicious transactions mentioned during the House hearings were not automatically connected to illegal acts.
Suspicious transactions does not equate to any wrongdoing or unlawful activity. Perhaps the bank thought or tagged it as suspicious, so umakyat sa AMLAC. Hindi naman ibig sabihin nun, illegal na kaagad or may money laundering na kaagad.
Her defense team also claimed some allegations and evidence presented during deliberations were not part of the two impeachment complaints.
We're not naive, di ba? We have observed what's been happening sa committee hearings, pagpapalabas ng iba't ibang subpina para kumuha ng mga sinasabi nilang ebidensya, kahit ang mga ito ay hindi naman bahagi ng dalawang impeachment complaints.
VP Sara's camp has this message to the House Committee on Justice. Proceed to the voting and attempt to take the case to the Senate Impeachment Court as they are confident that they can disprove all the allegations. Ched Gatchalian, Billionaryo News Channel.
Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste denies plans to join any political party amid reports he may leave Lakas CMD. Sources say he is set to transfer to PDP Laban, but Leviste told Billionaryo News Channel he has no such plans at the moment. He said he ran as an independent, joined Lakas after the elections for committee posts, and later moved to give them up to speak freely in Congress. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, finds substantial grounds to believe former President Rodrigo Duterte is responsible for crimes against humanity in connection with its war on drugs. This led to the unanimous decision of ICC pretrial judges to confirm the charges against him and order the case to proceed to trial. Joash Malimban has the story.
The International Criminal Court Pretrial Chamber 1 has now issued its ruling on the confirmation of charges against former President Rodrigo Duterte. The crimes against humanity cases against the former leader will now proceed to a full-blown trial.
Today, the judges of Pretrial Chamber 1 of the International Criminal Court unanimously confirmed all the charges against Rodrigo Roa Duterte and committed him to trial before a trial chamber.
According to the ICC, there are substantial grounds to believe that the former president is responsible for crimes against humanity on murder and attempted murder in connection with its bloody war on drugs. The court adds that these crimes were allegedly committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack against a civilian population from November 2011 to March 2019, during his time as mayor of Davao City and later as president of the Philippines. This year's covered the period when the country was still a member of the Rome Statute. The ICC further clarifies that Duterte's camp is not automatically entitled to appeal the pretrial chamber's decision, but may request permission from the trial chamber to file an appeal.
The case will be transferred to a trial chamber composed of 3 different judges who will decide on the next steps leading up to the trial.
The ICC maintains that the proceedings will be fair, ensuring that the defense is given adequate time to prepare, while also upholding the rights of the families of drug war victims. Joash Malimban, Billionaryo News Channel.
The camp of former President Rodrigo Duterte insists there is no basis for the evidence presented by prosecution witnesses before the International Criminal Court. Duterte's lawyer, attorney Nicholas Kaufman, told Inquirer.net that the supposed state policy to kill drug suspects under the Duterte administration is complete fiction. Meanwhile, former legal counsel Salvador Panelo called the ICC decision a, quote, foregone conclusion. He says the prosecution lacks strong evidence and is relying on what he described as speculation and hearsay. Panelo also questions the ICC's jurisdiction, saying the Philippines already withdrew from the Rome Statute. For Panelo, the developments show that the case may have already been prejudged. The ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel is extended by 3 weeks after high-level talks at the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump hosted the ambassadors of the 2 countries for a second round of talks. That comes a day after Israeli strikes killed at least 5 people, including a journalist. Trump said the United States will work with Lebanon to help it protect itself from Hezbollah and expressed hope of hosting both nations' leaders soon. As for Iran, Trump did not give a timeline on when he would end the war, telling reporters at the White House not to rush him. He also said in a social media post that Washington is in total control of the Strait of Hormuz, which he described as, quote, sealed up tight until Iran is able to make a deal. We're taking a quick break. Business 360 will be right back. Philinvest Development Corporation approves cash dividends in its board meeting held today. In a disclosure to the Philippine Stock Exchange, the company declared cash dividends of around 14 centavos per share for shareholders on record as of May 12, 2026. This is payable on or before May 22, 2026. Meantime, FDC's real estate subsidiary Philinvest Land approves key corporate appointments in its latest board meeting. The firm has elected 9 board directors for 2026 to 2027, naming attorney Efiro Luis Amatong as lead independent director. The operator of 7-Eleven in the Philippines is pushing ahead with expansion despite uncertainty from the Middle East conflict. Philippine 7 Corporation is setting aside up to 5 billion pesos in capital expenditures this year. The company plans to open 400 new 7-Eleven stores nationwide by year-end. More than half of the planned openings will be in the Visayas and Mindanao, driving growth beyond Metro Manila and Luzon. Philippine 7 now operates more than 4,500 stores across the country. It says it remains on track to reach 5,000 stores this year. The Manila Electric Company, or Meralco, is pushing back against claims that so-called extra charges in electricity bills are company-imposed. Meralco says these are government-mandated pass-through costs, not earnings from the power distributor, and are fully itemized in customer bills. The company says these include taxes, subsidies for vulnerable sectors, and charges that support renewable energy programs under existing regulations. Let's take a look at how local markets are performing. As of 9:50 a.m., the PCCI is in the green, up 0.2%. Value turnover stands at 460 million pesos. Market breadth is bullish with 56 advancers, 52 decliners, and 56 unchanged stocks. Meanwhile, early trade shows mixed movements among active stocks, with Ayala Land slipping over 1%. Shares of East West Banking Corporation hit a 52-week high. The bank reported a more than 21% increase in net income to over 9 billion pesos. It also followed the company's declaration of nearly 2 billion pesos in cash dividends. And let's take a look at how global financial markets performed overnight. Wall Street fell in choppy trading as hopes faded for a quick end to the Iran war. Investors also weighed mixed earnings reports on and renewed concerns over AI-driven disruption in the software sector. The Dow Jones dropped almost 0.4%. The S&P 500 fell 0.4%, while the Nasdaq lost almost 0.9%. Zooming out to the rest of the world, how are tensions in the Middle East impacting other economies? We have this report from Joel Caballero.
Nigeria averts the stoppage of operations of domestic airlines due to high jet fuel prices. Nigeria's president has agreed in principle to write off part of their debt to aviation agencies. The government will also set up a committee to review taxes, levies, and fees charged on domestic air tickets. Fuel marketers will also meet with officials to resolve fuel pricing disputes.
We must thank AON because they had the option to double and triple their fares on domestic routes. But they also saw the problem that would have caused. First of all, it would have overheated the country. Secondly, they would have priced tickets out of the reach of the ordinary person.
In Bolivia, trucks continue to line up at gas stations for hours due to the worsening diesel shortage. The state-owned oil company is working to resolve the issue through imports. An expert warns that the gap between Bolivia's subsidized domestic fuel and regional market prices leads to more smuggling. The Middle East crisis seems to have a positive effect in India. Supply chain and fuel disruptions triggered by the war in Iran has benefited Indian cotton yarn makers due to an increase in demand from clients in China. The rupee has also weakened about 7% against the yuan this year, making Indian cotton yarn imports cheaper for Chinese buyers. Joel Caballero, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
And that's it for Business 360. I'm Robert Tan. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Billionaryo News Channel.